Today on Straight Talk Africa, former Cuban President Fidel Castro is dead at the age of 90. His communist government survived a U.S.-backed invasion of Cuban exiles, a superpower missile crisis, assassination plots, and decades of U.S. economic sanctions. His influence on African and world politics examined next, right here on Straight Talk Africa. Hello and welcome to Straight Talk Africa live from the Voice of America studios here in Washington. I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. Shaka Sali is on assignment.
Well, hello to you, Esther, and hello to all our viewers and listeners on the continent and elsewhere. I'm Mariama Diallo, your social media reporter.
Today we'll talk about Fidel Castro's impact on Africa.
Lots of reactions on this one, Esther. Coming up later in our STA inbox, we'll share your thoughts on the topic. That's through your emails, tweets, and Facebook comments. That's ahead on Straight Talk Africa. Hope you'll stay with us.
Fidel Castro lived long enough to see Washington announce the re-establishment of full diplomatic relations with Havana in the subsequent visit by a sitting U.S. president to the island in March 2016. VOA's Bill Rodgers has this profile of the man.
Fidel Castro Ruz was born August 13, 1926, and grew up to become one of the leaders of the movement against the dictatorship of Fulgencio Batista. He led a guerrilla force that eventually routed Batista's army and took over the island in 1959. His victory and triumphant entry into Havana captured the world's attention, but soon he steered the country toward communism and the orbit of the Soviet Union. Cuban pro-democracy activist Frank Calzone.
He's a man who made a lot of promises to the Cuban people. Cubans were going to have freedom, they were going to have honest government, they were going to have a return to the Constitution. Instead, what he gave him was a Stalinist type of government.
The United States mounted an invasion of Cuba by a group of Cuban exiles in 1961, but Castro's forces crushed the invaders at the Bay of Pigs. 1 year later, Cuba was at the center of a confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union over the placement of nuclear missiles on the island. A nuclear war was narrowly averted. As a close ally of Moscow, Fidel Castro deployed Cuban troops to various Cold War hotspots, such as Angola. His policies turned Cuba into an international player. Cuba expert Wayne Smith.
I think he will be remembered as the leader who put Cuba on the world map. Before Castro, Cuba was considered something of a banana republic. It didn't count for anything in world politics. Castro certainly changed all that, and suddenly Cuba was playing a major role on the world stage, in Africa as an ally of the Soviet Union, in Asia and so forth, and certainly in Latin America.
At home, universal education and health care were accomplishments that came at the cost of human rights and democracy. Dissidents were thrown in jail, and their relatives who protested were often intimidated by pro-government mobs. Cuban pro-democracy activist Frank Calzone.
Fidel Castro kept power through fear, through the use of a secret police, through manipulating political forces, just like Stalin did, or just like Hitler did.
Mr. Castro frequently denounced the United States, often staging mass rallies to protest the U.S. economic embargo against his country. Despite decades of U.S. pressure, he managed to stay in power until being sidelined by intestinal surgery in July 2006. The ailing leader formally relinquished the presidency in February 2008. Later that month, his younger brother Raul, who had been acting president, officially assumed the post after a pro forma election by Cuba's National Assembly. Fidel Castro's thoughts on various subjects continue to be faithfully published in Cuba's state-run newspaper. He also received visitors, such as close friend and ally, Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez, along with other dignitaries. And it was his continued presence on the world stage that made him unique, says Philip Peters, a Cuba specialist at the Lexington Institute.
I think all admit he's a very large historical figure who won a very impressive military victory in the Cuban Revolution, who maneuvered through very difficult circumstances in the international sphere. He put Cuba on the map in many ways, far beyond its importance in history, far beyond its economic capabilities.
But the Cuban people paid a heavy price, says Frank Calzone.
Whatever good he did, the cost of the Cuban people have to pay in lives, in suffering, in torture, far exceeds whatever positive could be said about him.
Tyrant or revolutionary, Fidel Castro remained at the center of the world's media spotlight until the end, an object of fascination for some and repudiation for others. Bill Rodgers, VOA News.